Welcome to the Golden Gems podcast. Today we're taking a deep dive into Augustus Owsley Stanley III, the clandestine chemist who synthesized 5 million doses of LSD and built a 75-ton wall of sound.
It's genuinely wild to think about his legacy right now, especially, when you frame it from the context of where we sit today.
Right, in 2026.
Exactly. I mean, look at the modern medical landscape. You have institutions like Johns Hopkins, Imperial College London, the University of Basel. They're all actively running these highly controlled clinical trials with LSD.
Treating it as a precision psychiatric tool.
Right. They're using it to combat treatment-resistant depression, severe anxiety, cluster headaches. They are painstakingly rehabilitating this molecule, taking it completely out of that chaotic, tie-dyed shadow of the 1960s counterculture and, locking it into sterile, perfectly controlled clinical environments.
Yeah, imagine walking into one of those modern clinics today. Everything is white, it's sterile, it's perfectly measured down to the exact microgram. But to understand how we got to this point of clinical precision, you really have to look at the man who essentially birthed that 1960s counterculture in the first place.
Oh, absolutely.
Because before the FDA protocols and the modern pharmaceutical patents, there was Augustus Owsley Stanley III, universally known as Bear. And the mission of our deep dive today is to really explore the profound central paradox of this man.
And it is a massive paradox.
It really is. I mean, you are looking at a figure who was simultaneously a convicted master criminal and an absolute visionary physicist. He was this cultural architect whose uncompromising, almost militant obsession with purity didn't just fuel a cognitive revolution. It literally shaped modern live acoustics as we know them.
Yeah, this isn't your standard true crime narrative or just some nostalgic music history recap.
No, not at all. We are doing a forensic breakdown of a brilliantly obsessive mind.
And to really understand the architecture of that mind, you have to look at the environment that forged it, right? Because Bear was born in 1935 into serious, heavy Southern political aristocracy.
Like, incredibly deep roots.
Oh, yeah. His grandfather, who he was actually named after, was a governor of Kentucky and a United States senator. So the Stanley family was absolutely steeped in these deep-rooted Southern traditions, backroom political maneuvering, rigid social hierarchies, all of that.
But Bear's internal wiring was just fundamentally incompatible with that world.
Completely incompatible. He looked at the machinery of governance, the compromises of politics, and, well, what he saw totally revolted him. He viewed the entire system as a sloppy amalgamation of human variables.
Sloppy human variables.
Yeah, it lacked precision. It relied on emotion and persuasion and ultimately human error.
Looking at these early notes on his life,
Yeah.
okay, let's unpack this. Because this idea of sloppy human variables is truly the Rosetta Stone for understanding his entire life. Think of his family's political machinery, like a poorly tuned, distorting speaker system. It's muddy, it's unpredictable, the signals are just bleeding into one another. Bear spent his entire youth running away from that political distortion to find environments where he could control every single variable.
He needed absolute, undeniable fidelity.
Exactly.
And that need for control clashed violently with his environment when he was just 15 years old. The conflict between his internal reality and his family's external expectations reached this massive breaking point.
Which resulted in him going to a psychiatric hospital, right?
Yeah, St. Elizabeth's in Washington, D.C. And the wild part is it was a voluntary commitment.
Wait, voluntary, at 15.
Yeah. And he spent 15 months in that facility. Now imagine being in your most formative adolescent years, subjected to the sensory deprivation and the psychological containment of a 1950s psychiatric ward.
I can't even imagine. The architecture of a place like that in the mid-century wasn't designed for healing at all.
No, it was designed entirely to subdue and control.
But the incredible thing is that Bear didn't just submit to the environment. He studied it.
Precisely. It became an absolute laboratory for him. He spent those 15 months observing the mechanics of human behavior and institutional failure. He analyzed the psychiatrists, the orderlies, as if they were biological machines.
Just analyzing the flaws in the system.
Right. And he concluded that their entire system of authority was built on flawed premises and completely arbitrary power dynamics. That experience didn't cure him of anything. It permanently destroyed any trust he had in institutional wisdom.
So he gets out, and his pursuit of pure mechanical perfection really accelerates from there. I mean, in 1956, he joins the Air Force for 18 months, diving headfirst into electronics and radar.
Which makes perfect sense for him.
Right, because radar is a system based on strict, undeniable physical laws, not arbitrary human power. If a wave bounces back, it bounces back. It doesn't lie to you.
But predictably, the military hierarchy was still too restrictive for his fierce independence.
Yeah, he couldn't handle the chain of command. So he tries the academic route next. He starts studying engineering at the University of Virginia, but drops out because he finds the curriculum too theoretical, too slow.
And then he makes this radical, almost absurd pivot.
This is my favorite part.
In 1958, he sees the Bolshoi Ballet perform, packs up everything, moves to Los Angeles, and starts studying to become a professional ballet dancer.
Which, on the surface, seems like an absolute left turn. I mean, from radar electronics to ballet.
It sounds crazy, but it makes perfect sense when you look at the underlying physics of it.
Right.
Ballet demands a forensic understanding of human anatomy, of spatial geometry, of gravity. It is the physical manifestation of the exact purity he was seeking.
They're controlling the human body with exacting precision.
Exactly. You are eliminating the sloppy variables of normal human movement to achieve something geometrically perfect.
But the human body still has kinetic limitations. I mean, no matter how perfectly you control the muscles, it's still bound by physics. Gravity always wins eventually. So if physical perfection has a ceiling, where do you go to find absolute limitless malleability? You go to the mind. Which takes us to 1963 at UC Berkeley.
The absolute epicenter of the brewing cultural revolution.
Right, and this is where he consumes his first dose of LSD. Now, this was the original pharmaceutical-grade product manufactured by Sandoz laboratories in Switzerland.
Highly pure.
Extremely. And for Baer, this wasn't just a recreational weekend trip. It was the complete structural dismantling of consensus reality. It proved to him that human perception is infinitely malleable.
And that consciousness itself could be chemically reprogrammed.
Exactly.
Which initiates the massive turning point of his life. Because if consciousness can be altered chemically, he decides he has to master the synthesis pathway himself. He flat out refuses to rely on outside institutions to supply it.
Because he doesn't trust institutions.
Exactly. So by 1965, he makes the calculated, highly technical decision to become a clandestine chemist. Now, it's crucial to note, the legal context of the era here, LSD was not yet explicitly illegal in 1965.
Right, it was this massive legal gray area.
Yeah, you could legally order the precursor chemical lysergic acid monohydrate from standard pharmaceutical supply companies. So utilizing a chemistry lab at UC Berkeley, Baer legally orders 500 grams of the precursor, and it begins teaching himself the incredibly complex synthesis process.
And we really need to emphasize how difficult this chemistry actually is.
Yeah.
This is not like, baking a cake or making moonshine in a bathtub.
Not at all.
The synthesis pathway for lysergic acid dialumamide is extraordinarily sensitive. The molecules are incredibly fragile. It requires an inert atmosphere.
Meaning you have to pump out all the oxygen and replace it with nitrogen.
Right. Strict temperature controls and absolute surgical sterility. A single speck of dust, a slight fluctuation in heat, or even exposure to UV light, and the entire yield degrades into inactive isomers.
It's ruined.
Yep. But Baer approached this with the exact same forensic obsession he applied to radar electronics and ballet. He set up a basement laboratory and completely perfected the process.
And the result was an exceptionally pure, extremely potent batch of 300,000 initial doses, known on the street as white lightning.
300,000 doses, that's staggering.
And here is the kicker. The thing that makes him such a historical anomaly, he didn't do it to get rich. He viewed it as a public service, a tool for cognitive liberation, and he just gave the vast majority of it away for free.
Which is insane to think about from a criminal enterprise standpoint. But this mass distribution brings him directly into the orbit of Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters.
Oh, yeah. Now, Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, had a very different introduction to psychedelics.
Very different.
He had been a volunteer in the CIA-funded MKUltra experiments at the Stanford Research Institute, taking government-supplied LSD, psilocybin, and mescaline. The CIA was looking for mind control agents and truth serum.
Dark stuff.
Yeah. And Kesey takes this highly clinical, manipulative experience and essentially flips it on its head to create the acid tests. These were chaotic cross-country parties fueled by LSD-laced Kool-Aid, strobe lights, and overwhelming sensory assault.
Total chaos.
What's fascinating here is the profound contrast between Kesey's background and Baer's methodology.
Oh, for sure.
Kesey's introduction to LSD is rooted in the messy, trauma-inducing psychological warfare context of the CIA's MKUltra experiments. And Kesey's response to that is to create intentional, sprawling chaos. Bayer, on the other hand, operates with sterile, exacting, pharmaceutical-grade laboratory standards, yet Bayer becomes the primary supplier for Kesey's absolute madness.
Wait, hold on. This is where I get completely stuck, and I really have to push back on this. Because it feels like a massive historical contradiction.
How so?
Well, we have a guy who literally drops out of standard society because humans are sloppy variables. He needs sterile labs, precise temperature controls, and zero distortion. So how on earth does a man who spent his life running away from chaos voluntarily become the central nervous system of Ken Kesey's chaotic, messy, strobe-lit acid tests?
It's a great question.
I mean, that is the definition of a sloppy variable. It makes no sense to me.
It seems like a contradiction until you realize what Bayer was actually trying to control. The acid tests themselves weren't the variable he was focusing on. The molecule was. Bayer saw the acid tests as the necessary social vehicle for cognitive liberation, but for that liberation to work, the chemical catalyst, the engine of the vehicle, had to be absolutely flawless.
I see.
Yeah, he didn't mind the social and psychological chaos of the party. As long as the chemical input going into the attendees' brains was perfectly pure, he was providing the reliable, pristine engine.
So he controlled the core input.
Exactly, and it's actually at these acid tests that his need for control shifts to an entirely new target, live music.
Right, because you can't have the acid test without the Grateful Dead. They are playing these long, highly improvised sets at the parties.
Yeah, they were basically the house band.
And Bayer attends a show in late 1965, and he is entirely unimpressed. But crucially, not by the musicianship. He is absolutely horrified by the audio quality.
It offended his sensibilities.
Deeply. To his highly analytical ears, the sound is muddy, it's distorted, it's just full of uncontrolled acoustic variables. So he walks right up to the band after the show, bluntly tells them their sound system is absolute garbage, and offers to fix it.
And he completely takes over. He becomes their official audio engineer, but it creates this incredible dual existence for him.
Batman and Bruce Wayne style.
Basically. By day, he is a clandestine chemist synthesizing millions of doses in inert, nitrogen-filled atmospheres. By night, he is redesigning speaker cabinets, studying phase cancellation, and pouring his underground drug money into funding the Grateful Dead's equipment and housing.
He is essentially the central bank and the lead architect of the entire counterculture.
He really was. But, as you'd expect, the state eventually intervenes. California criminalizes LSD in 1966, followed by a sweeping federal prohibition in 1968.
And Bayer just ignores this, right?
Oh, he ignores the laws entirely. He views them as fundamentally unjust restrictions on cognitive liberty, just a continuation of the flawed institutional control he sought at St. Elizabeth's. But the hammer inevitably drops.
It always does.
On December 21st, 1967, his lab in Orinda, California, is raided. Police seize 350,000 doses of LSD, along with massive quantities of STP and DMT. He's convicted in 1970 and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison at Terminal Island.
And this is where his absolute refusal to stop analyzing things gets almost comical.
It really does.
Even in federal prison, his mind refuses to stay idle.
Yeah.
Stripped of his chemical precursors, his sterile lab, and all his audio equipment, what does he do?
He pivots entirely into metallurgy.
Right. He takes that microscopic, obsessive focus and spends his time from 1970 to 1972 mastering the highly technical trade of metalwork. Manipulating gold and silver at a molecular level with the exact same precision he used to synthesize lysergic acid.
It's just how his brain worked.
Wait, so the government takes away his chemistry lab and his immediate response is, fine, I'll just master the molecular structure of gold and silver in a prison workshop.
Yeah, he couldn't turn it off.
That is a staggering level of obsessive compulsion. But it doesn't stop there. When he gets out in 1972, he goes straight back to the Grateful Dead. But his ambitions have scaled up massively.
Oh, incredible.
He sets out to build a live speaker system with absolutely zero acoustic compromise, no feedback, no distortion, which results in the legendary 1974 Wall of Sound.
The Wall of Sound. We are talking about a 75-ton, 40-foot-tall acoustic behemoth made up of over 600 individual speakers.
75 tons. That is just absurd for a touring band.
It was unprecedented, and the physics behind it are entirely revolutionary for the time. The fundamental problem with live sound in stadiums back then was something called intermodulation distortion.
Right.
To explain how that works, if you push a bass guitar and a high-pitched vocal through the exact same paper speaker cone, the cone physically tries to vibrate at two drastically different speeds simultaneously.
Which you can't do.
No, it can't do it perfectly, so the frequencies clash and muddy the sound entirely.
Think of normal live sound, like trying to mix red, blue, and yellow paint in a single bucket. You just get a muddy brown mess. That's intermodulation distortion, the frequencies smashed together in one speaker.
Exactly.
But Baer realized that if you give Jerry Garcia's guitar its own isolated speaker tower, you aren't mixing the paint in the bucket anymore. You are projecting distinct, pure beams of color directly at the audience.
He solved the distortion by assigning dedicated speaker columns to specific instruments. Jerry Garcia had his own exclusive tower of speakers. Phil Lesh's bass had a completely separate tower reaching all the way up to the ceiling.
The vocals had an isolated phase-canceled array too, right?
Yep. Furthermore, he eliminated stage monitors entirely. The wall of sound was placed entirely behind the band, so the musicians heard the exact same crystalline, unadulterated mix that the audience heard. It pushed 26,400 watts of continuous power, delivering flawless, high-fidelity audio to an audience whether they were 2 yards or 200 yards away.
You know, reviewing all these schematics, here's where it gets really interesting. If you think about it, the wall of sound is a direct mechanical translation of his ballet training.
Oh, how so?
Think of the entire band's audio as a single human body. In ballet, a dancer isolates specific muscle groups to achieve pure, controlled kinetic motion without losing balance.
Okay.
They're isolated specific audio frequencies by giving them their own speaker columns, treating the massive sound system like a perfectly controlled anatomical chart. He forcefully prevented the frequencies from bleeding into one another, achieving pure, undeniable acoustic motion.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. It was a true engineering marvel, but it was also a complete logistical collapse.
I mean, it had to be.
To maintain that level of uncompromising perfection, it required 3 full-size tractor trailers just to transport it from city to city. They needed 2 entirely separate touring crews.
Wait, 2 crews?
Yeah, one crew would be assembling the massive structure at the next venue, a process that took 12 to 14 hours, while the band played the current show through a second identical system.
That's insane.
And a disassembly took another 8 hours. The financial burden was absolutely astronomical. Because he refused to compromise on the fidelity, they had to retire the wall of sound after just 6 months of touring.
It literally bankrupted itself through perfection.
It really did.
But the obsession with purity lived on in the vault. Baer meticulously recorded over 1,300 live concert soundboard tapes, which are now known as the Sonic Journals.
Right, highly sought after.
And these weren't just Grateful Dead shows either. He captured incredibly pristine audio of Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Johnny Cash. He demanded raw, unadulterated audio signals straight from the board.
He was everywhere.
He also designed the iconic Steal Your Face logo.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a cool graphic for t-shirts. The lightning bolt slicing to the skull actually represented the raw electrical power flowing through the wall of sound.
Right, the 26,000 watts.
Exactly. And the skull represented mortality, impermanence, a literal memento mori. It was the ultimate synthesis of his 2 lifelong obsessions: rigorous electrical engineering and profound psychedelic philosophy.
Yet, as we move into the later decades of his life, we see the very real tragedy of this kind of absolutism.
Yeah, it takes a dark turn.
The exact same uncompromising nature that allowed him to master clandestine chemistry and revolutionize stadium acoustics began to rigidify into extreme, unyielding personal and biological paranoia.
It isolated him.
Completely. From the mid-1960s onward, he adopted a strict all-meat carnivorous diet. And he didn't do this casually. He believed absolutely, based on his own reign of anthropology, that humans were obligate carnivores.
He thought vegetables were toxic, right?
Yeah, he decided that carbohydrates were literally toxic poisons degrading the human machine, and that vegetables actively interfered with nutritional absorption.
And he held that line even in literal life or death situations. When he was diagnosed with throat cancer in 2005, he distrusted the medical establishment entirely. He completely refused standard protocols.
Because of course he did.
Right. And when he eventually survived and went into remission, he didn't credit any medical intervention. He credited his all-meat diet. He firmly believed that by eliminating carbohydrates, he had literally starved the malignant tumor of the glucose it needed to survive.
He viewed his own biology as just another laboratory experiment he could optimize.
Exactly.
And that profound paranoia extended to the global environment as well. He completely rejected the consensus science on anthropogenic climate change. Instead, he became consumed by an apocalyptic belief that the Earth was entering a massive natural ice age cycle and that the Northern Hemisphere would soon suffer a catastrophic thermal event.
Which pushed him to leave the country.
It did. This belief ultimately drove him into physical exile. In 1982, he retreated to a remote 120-acre off-grid compound in the dense bush of Mareeba, Queensland, Australia.
Total isolation.
Yeah, he built a completely self-contained ecosystem out there, severing all possible ties with the flawed machinery of modern civilization. This raises an important question, though.
What's that?
If we look at this isolation impartially, is it madness? Or is it simply the logical, tragic endpoint for a man who systematically refused to accept consensus reality on any front?
Wow.
I mean, from his grandfather's Southern politics to standard audio engineering to dietary science and eventually to global climate models, he rejected it all.
It's something you really have to wonder about because the insight here is terrifying if you think about it. The exact same mental framework that makes you a genius. The ability to look at consensus reality and say, you're all wrong, I can build it better, is the exact same framework that leads to total paranoid isolation.
That's a double-edged sword.
Right. To the total dismantling of his trust in institutions, which, remember, started when he was locked in the St. Elizabeth's psychiatric ward at 15 and was solidified by his first dose of LSD. Did that ultimately trap him?
It seems like it.
If you never trust the consensus, who do you trust when you actually get sick? Did the very mechanisms he used to free his mind ultimately lock him inside an impenetrable, off-grid reality of his own making?
He's certainly never compromised on it.
No, he lived in that isolated reality until the very end. On March 12, 2011, at the age of 76, he died in a violent car crash on a rural highway near his compound in Australia. His wife survived, but the complex, relentlessly calculating neurological network of Baer was instantly terminated.
And he died fundamentally unrepentant.
Completely, viewing his massive illegal chemistry operation as a profound community service.
But the physical death of the man did not stop the propagation of his work. I mean, imagine you're standing in an arena today listening to a pristine concert mix. You probably take that crystalline sound for granted.
Most people do.
But what you're actually hearing is the direct evolutionary result of a 1970s acid chemist's absolute refusal to compromise. Modern line-array speaker systems exist entirely because Baer proved that immense power, when properly divided and phase-corrected, could eliminate intermodulation distortion.
His fingerprints are all over modern audio.
They really are. And his audio legacy is fiercely guarded by the Owsley Stanley Foundation, which preserves those 1,300 pristine soundboard recordings.
Which brings us full circle back to the clinical reality we opened with, the ultimate institutional irony.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have this profound, almost cinematic tension. In 2026, the FDA is approving highly controlled clinical trials for LSD to treat anxiety and depression.
Right.
The exact same molecule that Baer painstakingly perfected in his sterile basement lab, the exact molecule the federal government threw him in Terminal Island Prison for manufacturing, is now being heralded by institutions as a breakthrough psychiatric therapy.
It's wild.
The underground chemist who synthesized millions of doses and gave them away for free to liberate human consciousness is branded a criminal. Meanwhile, modern pharmaceutical companies are patenting synthetic analogs of that exact same molecule to monetize and control it, and they are hailed as biomedical innovators.
So what does this all mean? We are left looking at a man who treated human consciousness and live acoustics as variables that could be optimized with total unyielding precision.
Absolute precision.
He categorically refused to accept the distortion of the world as it was handed to him, whether that distortion was political, chemical, or auditory. But it leaves you with something to really mull over, something that applies long after the music stops.
Yeah.
When we look back at the architects of these tectonic cultural shifts, do they actually require this level of militant, almost unbearable fanaticism to succeed? Is compromise the ultimate enemy of legacy?
It's a heavy thought.
If Baer had been willing to compromise on the purity of his basement lamp, on the impossible logistics of the wall of sound, or on his trust in society, would the 1960s have happened the way they did?
Probably not.
Or does true progress require someone willing to look at the X-ray of society, declare the diagnostic machine completely broken, and retreat to the basement to build a better one entirely from scratch? Thank you for listening to the Golden Gems podcast. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep celebrating the power of uncompromising voices.